Salams, this is Daily Debrief coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. I'm Siddhantani, and on the show today we're going to be talking about infighting between various factions of the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. We look at the Israeli policy of administrative detention, and finally another tragedy on the European borders with Syrian refugee seekers. First up, intense fighting has been on for the past 3 days between forces affiliated to the Islah Party and those loyal to other factions of the Saudi Arabia-led coalition in the oil-rich Shabwah province in southeastern Yemen. At least 35 people have been killed and scores of others injured in the fighting so far. This is as per reports from the Chinese agency Xinhua. The fighting broke out immediately after the dismissal of an official affiliated to the Islah Party, which happened on Monday, and it continued despite the Saudi-backed Presidential Leadership Council, which has its headquarters in Aden, issuing a statement in support of the decision. Meanwhile, on a separate front, the US Special Envoy for Yemen, Tim Lenderking, began a whirlwind tour of Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Oman, and other members of his diplomatic mission are traveling to Jordan as part of what the US is calling intense diplomatic efforts to extend a UN-mandated truce that has been in place in Yemen since before the holy month of Ramzan this year. They are attempting, apparently, to bolster these peace efforts, according to a statement made by the US State Department. I spoke a little while earlier to Abdul of People's Dispatch via video conference to find out what exactly is going on. Abdul, from the perspective of an audience that might not necessarily be very well versed with what's happening in internal politics in Yemen, could you tell us, on the one hand, we're hearing about this UN-brokered ceasefire agreement, and on the other, there is serious reports of several people being killed in violence on the ground. So what exactly is going on?
Well, the so-called Saudi-backed coalition against the Houthis is a coalition of various factions in Yemen, and both of them do not have much ground base, but they have militias fighting for them. Some of them, for example, they have their own ideological and programmatic differences. They just came together to fight against the Houthis backed by Saudi and UAE money. So, for example, Southern Transitional Council is basically one group which basically believes in a separate Southern Yemen state.
Right.
That is one group. Then there is Islah Party, which basically was the most strong party in the previous regime in Yemen, considered to be affiliated to Muslim Brotherhood. And that is also fighting against Houthis, but they have ideological issues with the UAE, and UAE does not like their presence.
Right.
And then there are other smaller factions here and there. Everyone has its own interest area. Everyone has its own sphere of influence. And they want to take control over as much resources of Yemen as possible. And because of the war with the Houthis, these differences were by and large kind of covered up. But because there is a ceasefire which is going on for last more than 4 years, 4 months now.
4 months,
it seems that the internal fight within these groups, backed by Saudis and UAE, has started emerging, and it has happened in past also. When there was no ceasefire last year, the Southern Transitional Council tried to take control over Aden and other areas. So similar fights have broken out between Islah supporters and the supporters of rest of the factions who oppose Islah. So that's why that is happening for last 4 or 5 days, and more than a couple of dozen people have died.
Which probably has also had a wider impact on the country, obviously. But Abdul, we are hearing from at least sections of the US press, the English press, that the US is kind of ramping up its diplomatic efforts. The special envoy is on a tour to several countries who are part of this coalition to try and sort of keep alive this ceasefire that actually the UN sort of mediated before the holy month. So, what is the peace that they are trying to broker, and how does this infighting kind of factor in with that larger perspective?
Well, US policy in Yemen, by and large, has been a very problematic, dicey policy for last 7 years at least. And even after Biden, who was the original, you can say, the propagator of the backer of the war in Yemen, when he was the vice president, even after he has come back to power in last year, since then, though he has made rhetorical comments here and there that US is withdrawing from the war, US will no more supply weapons to Saudi Arabia and UAE. But we know the real fact is that they have been supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia and UAE, and they have been basically trying to instigate the war in one way or another, because they still think this is one of the areas where they can earn a lot of profit, not only because there is a resource involved here, and then there is a sphere of influence which is contested, and they think that this will help them gain geostrategically. Apart from that, it is also a reason where they sell a lot of weapon, and for to selling that weapon, the conflict needs to be alive in some way or other. So the so-called peace talk they're trying to convert and then trying to withdraw is primarily to whatever the technical support they were providing. In fact, they want to kind of get rid of that, and they basically want to lead the Saudi Arabia to be more involved, and it's on the ground.
Right.
However, this is one version of the thing. There were unconfirmed reports few days back in the media that informally there is a US presence in southern Yemen also. So these are contradictory reports, and that is basically kind of this contradiction, that the policy of incoherence is a part of the larger plan to basically to show one face to the media that we are for peace, but on to keep the business interest, the imperialist interest also alive. So that's exactly what US is doing. It's a classic example of how hegemonic powers try to influence the regional conflicts directly or indirectly.
Right. All going according to plan then, Abdul, in that sense. We'll ask you to hang around because the next story also is from Palestine, and we need your perspective and insights on that as well. Palestinian detainee Khalil Awawdeh was moved to a hospital on Thursday, the 11th of August. This was the 162nd day of his hunger strike, and has had a serious impact on his health. Israeli prison authorities have refused to release Awawdeh, despite it being a condition central to the ceasefire agreement that ended 3 days of Israeli airstrikes on the besieged Gaza airstrip, which killed at least 47 people and prompted rocket attacks by Palestinian resistance forces in response. In a message to his family and supporters, Awawdeh said, and I quote, "I went on strike for freedom, and I have sacrificed a lot for the dearest and strongest need, freedom. My abstinence from food is not a rejection of life, but rather a rejection of chains." Abdul is still with us. Abdul, the release of Awawdeh was, like we were mentioning, a critical part of the ceasefire agreement after the recent Israeli strikes on the Gaza Strip. Why was it critical in those negotiations, and why is Israel now reneging on the agreement?
It was critical because Khalil has been on a hunger strike for more than 160 days now, 162, 163 days now, and his health condition is not great. He has been hospitalized, and there is a real danger that if he persists with with the hunger strike, he may not survive. And this is yet another innocent life which will be, because contrary to what Israel claims, that he is a member of Islamic Jihad, there has been no proof. He has been in detention for more than 7-8 months now, and the Israelis have failed to produce a single set of evidence against him that basically proves that there is no real reason for him to be behind bars. And therefore, in order to save the innocent life, the Palestinian resistance movements, the Palestinian human rights groups, and some of the international human rights groups also have appealed time and again that he should be released from jail, because his hunger strike is primarily against the jail. What he claims is that he is innocent and he has been unnecessarily put behind bars without trial, without charge, and also to basically highlight the whole idea, the whole policy of the preventive or the administrative detention, as Israelis call it. Why Israel is refusing to release it? As you rightly pointed out, that during the ceasefire talks, which were mediated by Egyptians, the media report says, and Islamic Jihad also claimed, one of the groups which were involved in resisting Israeli aggression, that it was one of the crucial conditions that he and other member of the Islamic Jihad, that who was basically arrested 2 weeks back, should be released. This is the basic condition on which the ceasefire was agreed. Israel is refusing to release him primarily because now he thinks it is a understanding among the Israelis that there is no reason to kind of fear that the conditions which led to its aggression last week will be revised, and there is real danger of any kind of offensive from the Palestinian side. So that it looks like they have become overconfident about their position.
It brings back into focus, Abdul, the subject that you were mentioning, and we've discussed before on the show as well, this policy of administrative detention. I suppose that is, again, central to what is happening with Awawdeh's time in prison. What impact will it have on the situation that exists as of today?
The whole policy or the law of so-called administrative detention is a violation of, by the way, international laws, which says that no person can be detained without charge or trial for a particular beyond a particular period.
Beyond a particular period, yeah.
Yes, and this this law gives Israeli authorities 6 months, which is the period defined, but that period is renewable for indefinite times. It can be renewed. So Khalil has been in prison for more than 8 months now, and his period of detention is renewed. Various human rights organizations, including the UN, has asked Israel to kind of drop this particular law. But I think this is a part of the larger paraphernalia of Israel's apartheid regime inside the occupied territories, where they have one set of laws for the people, Palestinian people in the occupied territories, another set of the law for the Israelis living in the illegal settlements within the occupied territories, and another set of laws for the Israelis who live in the 1948, within the 1948 borders. Right. So this is the law of administrative detention should be seen with this larger apartheid set of regimes. If you see, there are other similar policies followed. For example, the policy of collective punishment, where the Israeli authorities go and demolish houses of Palestinians who are considered to be what they call it involved in attacks on occupation and so on and so forth. They demolished houses, they forced them into displacement, and all sorts of discriminatory policies which Israelis follow. So Khalil's hunger strike, as I said before, is apart from his own release, is also a way of highlighting, making the discussions around the apartheid policies followed by Israelis inside the occupied Palestine highlight that also. So that is, and that's why it becomes very crucial to talk about this particular law.
Thanks, Abdul. We'll leave it there for today. And finally, in another tragedy, a 5-year-old Syrian girl died on Tuesday, that's a couple of days ago, as a group of 39 asylum seekers remained stranded on a Greek islet on the Hebros or Evros River this week. The child died early on Tuesday after she was stung by a scorpion. Another 9-year-old child is in critical condition and in need of urgent medical care. The islet is located on Greek territory near the border with Turkey. It's a highly militarized and restricted zone and one that refugees often use to make the perilous journey into Europe. On July 19th, Human Rights 360 was first alerted to the presence of a large transit group of predominantly Syrian people who had been stranded on an islet in the middle of the river since as far back as the 14th of July. Members of the group stated that after they entered the Greek mainland, they were apprehended, forced to undress, and then pushed back by authorities. The transit group reported that 2 people had died during the process because they were unable to swim. The practice of pushbacks of asylum seekers is illegal and prohibited under international law. As new information emerges on this particular case, it appears that groups such as the Border Violence Monitoring Network did in fact inform authorities of the presence of these asylum seekers, but for as long as a week, no assistance arrived. Anish has more on this story. So what is the policy approach that countries like Greece are taking in this case, Anish? Because we've seen, like, for example, at points where refugees are meant to register themselves, there are not enough facilities for the numbers that are seeking refuge. So obviously there will be a large number who will be left to their own devices or outside of the ambit of what the state is providing in terms of at least basic care, whether it's food, shelter, or medical aid. So it seems as though the entire structure is geared towards pushing people back rather than to allow them space as well as allow the processes of, yeah.
Yeah, so it is pretty much that. In many ways, if you look at it, there is on paper, obviously, the Greek state and of course the European Union at large have extensive systems of helping out refugees and asylum seekers. They have systems and lists of vulnerabilities that an asylum seeker should be eligible for to seek any of the asylum, and then even for those who do not fall under them, they have systems. But the question, as you said, the facilities are not as accessible. The facilities to apply for any of these categories of asylum is not accessible to most thousands of people who are trying to enter. Nevertheless, on paper and like with any kind of argument based on data, a majority of them do end up coming to Europe, but we have seen even those who go through the system, who are given asylum in these countries, are living in very pathetic conditions. We have heard of fires being spread in refugee camps, and that actually kills even, if not the same number of people, but a significant number of people every year. So these, and then there are obviously attacks on these migrants, and the right wing in Europe is also encouraging these sort of attacks on asylum seekers and refugees. And so in many ways, if you look at it, there is definitely, it's not just mere negligence at some level, but there is a great deal of attempt to disincentivize people from getting, and this disincentivizing comes in the form of threatening their life in many ways, because if you take out systems that will actually help them gain easy access to asylum process, that would mean that they will have to go through life-threatening routes and options that lead to such tragedies to begin with. So in many ways, this sort of behavior is like a larger policy issue. We have seen so far this year, more than 60 people have died in boat sinkings, and that is just the numbers that we know and of people who have documented in these boats. We do not know if there were dozens more or not, and if this specific boat sinking has the original number, as they say, 80 people, and there are more than 50 people missing right now, And if those missing are turns out to be dead, then this just pretty much doubles the number of people who died this year. So, and puts them across 100 or so people this year alone. 111 people died last year. So hundreds are dying every year, and that just makes this tragedy even bigger. Despite the numbers who do enter, as I'm saying, I'm emphasizing the fact that a lot of people still have to go through this perilous route just to gain safe haven and to be away from wars and conflicts that, again, European countries are quite involved in. This only makes the problem bigger, because unless they solve that part, we are going to see many more boat tragedies.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Becoming a perpetual cycle. All right, Anish. Right, on that extremely tragic note, we're bringing this episode of Daily Debrief to a close. From Anish, myself, and the entire team here at People's Dispatch, thank you very much for watching the show. For more details on these stories, of course, and all the other work we do, as always, please head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and give us a follow for updates on any of the regular social media platforms. We'll be back again tomorrow. Until then, stay safe. Goodbye.